Learn the most advanced recruiting techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with Rick Girard.
So discretion is defined by Merriam Webster as an ability to make responsible decisions. This is a quality that all leaders expect from their people, but as we know, it is not always the case. So how do you interview to uncover discretionary habits? That's the topic of today's show. Today's quote, "A sound discretion is not as much indicated by never making a mistake as never repeating it." And that was our friend Christian Nestell Bovee. I'm Rick Girard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. We help entrepreneurs and hiring managers avoid costly hiring mistakes by identifying specific problems and providing proven solutions to enable your company to win the right hire. We share insights from top-performing rebel entrepreneurs, disruptors, and industry experts like our guest today, Mr. Joseph Hopkins. He's the founder and senior managing partner of IPRESTIGE Emerge Fund. Joseph is a thought leader in AI, authentication, and security technologies. He leads an innovative emerging technologies firm that serves as a proprietary first mover advantage IP incubation model that concentrates on growth opportunities in digital identity protection, security, and advanced encryption technology. Man, that's a mouthful.
That's a mouthful.
You do a lot, my friend. All right, prior to Joseph's AI and digital identity security work, he served as key executive management roles in Fortune 500 companies, including Kaiser Permanente, 3M, GSK, Allergen, and KPMG. And I would imagine throughout your career, you've hired like hundreds of people, right?
I have indeed, yes.
Yeah, and that's what makes you a perfect guest for today's topic. Joseph, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Well, thanks, Rick. Appreciate you inviting me and looking forward to the show.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. All right, so today we're going to discuss why it's important to connect with people while adding value, and then we're going to talk about how to evaluate for good discretion in the hiring process. Sound like a plan?
Sounds great. Yeah.
All right, so let's get started with connecting with people. So let's talk about why this is important. I mean, I'm a big believer that in the hiring process, and even when you're working with people, it's a very transactional model. So why is it important to connect with people?
Well, so one of the businesses that I run is in fact an advisory IP intellectual property evaluation firm. So we work with lots and lots of different clients. So clients will judge you not only on the nature of the work, the kind of work that you do in terms of the quality of it, but they'll also judge you basically on how you read them, how you kind of come in and fit within the culture. It's largely assumed if you're doing an engagement with the client and you're being successful, that usually means you're also fitting within the culture, and that's important.
So how do we connect with people?
Well, so one of the things I try to encourage my folks to do, and something I've learned over my long career, I won't tell you how long I've been at it, but I've been out there a while, is I won't
say as long as I've been in either.
I think I got beat you a little bit, Rick, in terms of age.
But we look young because we both shave our heads.
This is true. I love your hairdo for sure.
So, my hairdo, my black eye.
Yeah. So I encourage people to do a few things, particularly when it comes to connecting with me or even one of my clients. So I think coming in with energy is really important. Mm-hmm. I also think eye contact is super important. I think it's also really important to make sure that you need to have some level of discretion to be able to sort of read people, to understand their cadence, to sort of pick up on what they like and what they don't like. And as unfair as that may sound, you need to be able to do it fairly quickly if you're engaging with the kinds of clients that we are normally doing business with. People will, generally speaking, judge you very quickly. And so you need to be able to pick up on these things quickly.
Well, and you have to be protective of other people's time.
That's exactly right.
So what's your definition then of discretion?
I think discretion for me is, again, picking up on a cadence of a particular leader or someone whom you may be working with. You need to sort of pick up on the likes and maybe the dislikes, I think, fairly quickly. I think using proper judgment is really important. In my line of business, in terms of consultancy work that we do, advisory work that we're doing, when clients that have assigned us with really critical, important work, they're expecting that we're going to be able to keep that very private. So I think integrity is really important. You can tell someone that you've got integrity, particularly a stranger that may not know you. They may or may not believe that. But generally speaking, if you're in my line of work, they're going to assume that you've got it, and you'll only have one chance to blow it with them.
To prove them wrong, right?
That's exactly right, yeah.
So this really kind of boils down to listening skills, right? Like developing your listening skills to understand who people are. So let's talk a little bit about that. What else is important besides developing your listening skills?
I think it's important to make sure, particularly in my line of work, that you're aware of what the engagement is, that the work that you're involved in, you know when you need to get done, what kind of work it is that you are involved in, how much time it's going to take you to get it done. And you've got to be able to really make sure that you're keeping the client really engaged with that as well. And I think that you need to make sure that you're constantly kind of reaching out to that client to let them know from an overall performance perspective, how things are going. They're going to be expecting you to ask questions based upon what they've told you in the past from an expectations perspective.
When you're bringing it back to the people that you're putting on site with the clients and that sort of thing, and you're hiring them, what's important for you to be able to kind of make sure that you're gauging the right person for the right client?
Yeah.
There's some matching that you need to do there, right?
There is. Well, I can get into some of the things that I do from an overall recruiting perspective in terms of, I think there's a balancing perspective one needs to do when it comes to just bringing people into my organization.
Sure.
I think for me, most people that work for me, and they've gotten to the place of actually getting to me, let's say within a typical interview, there's a few things I'm looking for. So one, obviously, is key for me is discretion, really making sure that there's someone that I think that I can ultimately put in front of a client, someone that I can maybe give an important piece of work to and have the faith that they actually can get it done. Sometimes it's more difficult when the person we've got young people that work for us, but certainly the younger you are, generally speaking, sometimes the harder it is to pick up on discretion because she's, generally speaking, don't necessarily have as much of a track record with a younger person as you do with an older person. Obviously, the older you are, the more work experience you've got, then there's a little bit of a record or a track record for you. So we can go back and we can take a look at, the jobs you worked for, people that you maybe regularly engage with beyond just friends, but also professional peers. And we can generally speaking, sort of get an indication in terms of you're a person that has the ability to use reasonable judgment, make good decisions. Sometimes folks who tend to be volatile aren't necessarily the best people for us because they offer a little bit more risk than maybe what we want to put in front of our clients.
So you can gain evidence as to whether or not that person is going to be successful in your organization.
That's right. Yeah.
And again, that kind of loops back to listening, right? To asking the right questions and gathering that information.
Yep.
All right, you're listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. I am Rick Girard, and for our podcast listeners, we're going to take a quick educational moment for our sponsors. Check out what we do at stridesearch.com. There you're going to find additional content, resources, and how I can take more ginkgo biloba. And you can book me to speak at your next meeting or conference. Today, our guest is Joseph Hopkins. He's the founder and senior managing partner of the IPRESTIGE Emerge Fund. And we're talking about how to find discretionary people that'll fit into your environment. So we talked a little bit about why this is important. Now let's talk about how to do this. How do we evaluate somebody to have good discretion?
There is a bit of subjectivity, but also I think you could balance that out with some level of objectivity. So a couple of things. One of the things, and this sounds a little hokey, but it's important to me, and I think generally speaking it's important to most people. Folks just may use different words for it. I do think that you need to be both professional. So you need to have a certain level of professionalism. I think we all know what that means. But you also, I think you need to be somewhat cool. So cool just simply means that if you're going into a situation and that situation, you need to sort of be able to fit within the situation without anyone sort of directing you how to do it. You have to be able to sort of adjust yourself based upon the situation you find yourself in. And you need to do it by which you're not necessarily exhibiting a lot of angst. And so you have to be a little eased, you have to be somewhat cool, but at the same time, again, in my world, you need to be professional at the same time.
So not cool like you and I, but like cool in the situation. More situational.
Well, that would be terribly difficult to do that, of course. But I think I've put folks in front of important clients, and sometimes they are so professional to where they're just uptight, to where it's just not rubbing correctly.
It's an uncomfortable situation.
It really, really is. And that starts to just get into some real just tough interaction situations.
So situational coolness.
Yeah.
I like that.
Sort of situational coolness. And again, that does require judgment, discretion. And again, I think sometimes the longer you've been at it, the more you can adjust yourself to it.
So how do you, in the interview process though, how are you able to evaluate for situational coolness?
I look at the shoes first of all. That's important. And usually if they've got a bunch of hair, then that's usually a no-go for student. No, just kidding. Look, I think generally speaking, I'm looking to see if the person is coming across fairly calm, if they're coming across confident, if they've got good eye contact, If they're picking up on mannerisms that I am exhibiting, that they need to sort of adjust themselves, I'm looking for all of these things. Sometimes I will do things out of the ordinary that's not necessarily characteristics of mine, just to sort of see how they're going to respond or react to it. That sort of thing, yeah.
Kind of whether or not they're able to like chameleonize themselves to you and that sort of thing. That's actually really important, especially if you're putting people in front of clients.
Yeah, it really, really is. Yeah. And then particularly when you think about the whole interview process, that this is where you've got to have a little bit of a balance. And again, I think I'm also looking for some of that during the interview process. During that process, there's probably 3 things I'm picking up on. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I think during the interview process, there's probably 3 things that we look for there, right? So one is what I would call more like, empirical type evidence.
Okay.
So, and of course, a lot of this is sort of resolved itself by the time they get in front of me. But in terms of, do they have the educational level that we're looking for? Do they have a certain level of job skills that we're looking for, job experience that we're looking for? So some of these things are fairly empirical. There's hard data there. So there's not a lot of subjectivity there.
So that's basically the stuff off the resume where they've worked.
Yep.
That sort of thing.
Yep.
Okay, that's
really black and white kind of
easy.
stuff.
Yeah.
Real black and white kind of stuff. And that stuff there, you just really need to be able to check the box off before you start to engage with people, in my opinion.
I find what's interesting about that is, okay, so we talk about resumes real quickly. I find that one of the most valuable space on a resume is the white space, because there's a lot of things that are not on a resume that people don't think to put on that are actually, valuable to you. Do you dig into that to kind of extrapolate any of that information?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because frankly, some of the white paper stuff is the most interesting thing about the person.
Yeah.
As example, I have an MBA and I have of course a bachelor's, but I also went to seminary. So
did you really?
I did. I went to Fuller Theological Seminary. That's how I actually got to California.
Okay.
I was a linguistics major and I studied, 5 languages actually.
So you didn't go into the priesthood?
Oh, well, it was more of an academic theologian.
Okay, got it.
But I studied Greek, Sanskrit, Aramaic, a few other languages that kept me fairly esoteric and rather boring to the girls. But what's interesting about the white space is that you can pick up things about a person that sort of makes them who they are, or pick up really interesting facts about them, or things that drive them from a passion perspective. So I try to ask people questions that aren't actually even on the resume, just to kind of pick up in terms of I'm trying to figure out some things that makes them interesting and appealing and attractive to our company or to myself.
And that would probably be your next piece, which would be what?
That's right. So my next one would be, in fact, what I would call this is a little bit more subjective, where I'm actually trying to reach out to their colleagues, reach out to their peers. It's really more what I call interpretive. So this is more where you're getting to a little bit more subjective. So it's not so much on
after the interview, though, right?
Well, no, this is doing the interview.
Okay.
Well, this is actually doing the interview process, but that's right, post my discussion with them. So it would be after the interview. Yes, that's correct.
But what are you looking for in the actual interview itself? Are you looking for these 3 pieces?
I think it's actually more holistic, right? So one is the actual just prerequisite to make sure they're qualified to sort of do the position that they're looking to do. 2 is the whole interpretive, and that is in terms of just reaching out to people that know them, people whom they've maybe worked with, to try to understand how they may have gotten along with the person, to understand some things about them that person may not necessarily tell me, things I necessarily wouldn't certainly find out on a resume. And then, of course, the third one, and you're right, that second piece there is stuff we normally would find out once we start, checking the person out a little bit more. And then lastly, of course, for me, it's the gut. The actual gut, my gut feel of the person. I try not to make that my sole criteria when I'm talking to someone from an interview perspective, but certainly I'm a big believer that you need to go with your gut as well. But I think gut is only so good, and what may feel good to me may not necessarily be the most accurate thing, right? So I think you have to balance gut out with the whole interpretive in terms of talking to peers that may know the person, as well as looking at the empirical data.
I always have that question of, okay, I get trusting your gut, and I'm big on that too.
Yep.
But what if your gut is wrong?
Well, it has been.
Yeah.
It has been.
I've had gut decisions that I made, and I was like, you know what? And it was wrong because I didn't ask the right questions, or I didn't load up my gut with the right information.
Yeah. No, it has been for sure. One of the things that I try to do in terms of sort of providing a little bit of a check and balance to myself is I will literally also reach out to my own network of people to make recommendations for folks for a role that I may be looking to try to fill. Normally, folks within my network, they know me. So they sort of know my cadence. They know the kind of person I am. They know what my drive, my passions are. They know how we do our business for the most part. And so normally I'll also ask them to, suggest some folks for me. That in itself, I think, filters a lot for me as well.
Referral based.
It does. That's really important.
Hey, look at most people hire through referrals, and those are usually your most successful hires.
That's right.
I mean, where I see it implode sometimes is when, hey, my friend is looking for a job. Can you help him out? That sort of thing. And you hire based on that, but that person's never worked with that person, that sort of thing. I've seen that backfire quite a few times. Getting back to how to evaluate. So you're trusting your gut. So what are you looking for? Education is important to you.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
And for some people, that's like a must-have. Are you a must-have person?
I don't want to sound
There's nothing wrong with that, by the way.
Yeah. I've been accused of folks that I work with or worked with in the past to be fairly draconian when it comes to this topic. But I do. I think education is really important to me. I think some of it is based upon just my own experience itself. I mean, I necessarily didn't grow up in the best neighborhood, but I was able to, go through different levels of schooling. And I think it actually indicates that if you can get yourself a degree, I think it indicates that you have the ability to accomplish something that's important.
You finish stuff.
Yeah. And by the way, it's not so much necessarily just a college education. I think trade schools are also super important. I think people who have talent, whether it's, want to become an electrician or maybe some level of, construction work, whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
You have to go to trade school, generally speaking, for some of these things. And so I think just having the ability to, being able to show that you actually completed something like a degree and/or a trade school, I think is really important to me. And I think that is an important piece that I look for. And for me, I think it's largely around, I'm giving someone a piece of really important work. Can they get it done without making excuses? Can they get it done in a timely fashion without making excuses?
Here, I'm going to give you that other argument, which I'm sure you've heard, right?
Yeah.
What about those people who are the exceptions? What about those people who actually are lifelong learners but did not finish? What about, Bill Gateses of the world and Zuckerberg?
First of all, thank goodness for the exceptions.
Yeah, right.
I'm pretty convinced our world wouldn't be where it is today without them. You think about Steve Jobs and think about Bill Gates, think about Zuckerberg, all these folks. But keep in mind here, these are very, very unique, oftentimes geniuses in their own right, but they are truly the exception. They are less than the 1/10 of 1%ers. So in my opinion, one should never run their lives based upon the exception. You need to follow the rule. And I tend to be one that will bat by the averages, if you will, and I can't follow the exception. But absolutely right. It's good to look at those folks, certainly admire them for what they do, but should one try to live a life like they have? It's an exceptional life, and I'm not convinced that that's how we should do it.
Yeah, and really, if you think about it, those exceptions are called entrepreneurs, and they're probably not looking for a job with you.
That's right.
Yeah, unless they're kind of trying to fund something else or do something else.
Yeah.
It's a background thing.
Yeah.
All right, that's awesome. All right, so what would you say would be 2 or 3 key takeaways that you can give the audience today that they can plug into their business that'll help them to kind of evaluate people in the right way?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things I would encourage folks to do is when you're interviewing people, really try to situate them for success. So I think having a super balanced approach is really important to me. Again, those three things I just mentioned.
Yeah, okay,
I don't think you should just go necessarily by gut. It's too subjective from a person like you making these judgments about someone that can impact someone's life. So that's one thing. 2, I think you need to be able to also use some interpretive ways of doing it by way of talking to peers, et cetera. I think some people do that. It's just a good hiring process, a way to do it.
Yeah.
And then largely you need to, I think there are some things that from a requirements perspective in your mind, if you think this is what the requirements are, you need to just keep yourself honest and hold to them. If education is one of them, if a certain level of job experience is one of them, job skills is one of them, you should stick to those things. So I think that's a balance between the hard data, between interpretive and gut. I think is really important. 2, it's important that we don't necessarily always take ourselves too serious, and so I think there's this whole cool factor to also being a really good professional. I think you need to have both. I think someone that comes off as too professional will be a little bit of a turnoff for some clients. I have lots of clients we deal with that are more medium, small-sized businesses, and they are looking for people that can fit in, I think, really, really well. And I think third one is just good discretion. I think that being able to pick up nuances on other cadence, whether it's clients or people like myself, if you're working for me or supporting a client, is important. And I think sometimes that's easier the older you get, of course. So sometimes it's more of a trial and error the younger you are, but as you get older in the work environment, using discretion becomes a little bit more easier because you kind of know what you're screwing up on and what you're not screwing up on.
Totally. And then for our audience, I just want to add one thing because, I see this a lot. Hiring on gut happens a lot. Like, hey, you know what? We talked about horses. We have a commonality. We talked about that for a half an hour. I liked him. Let's hire him. Not a good idea. But then also hiring entirely based on skills is a bad idea too, because, he told me he has 4 years of this, 7 years of that, and that checked off all my boxes. So, that other piece of it, those 3 check boxes, I think are key for sure.
Totally agree.
Well, we're just about out of time for today's show, Joseph. Thanks so much for your time investment today, and I want to welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community. Now, what would be the best way in which members of our audience can reach you, find you, and find out more about you?
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, thank you for inviting me. Great show.
Oh, thank you.
I love the ambience.
I always say the worst part of the show is the host.
Oh, no, come on. This is good. And again, I love the hairdo, so nice job there.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I got the memo.
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can certainly reach me there, Joseph K. Hopkins, or I also have a blog as well, Joseph, this is all one word, josephkhopkins.com, and pretty active on both of those mediums.
So and we'll have a link to it in the show notes for sure.
Thanks.
All right, so I want to thank our listening audience for tuning in this week's episode of Higher Power. Quick thanks to our team, our engineer, Christopher Decker, our producers, Andrea Ballin and Rick Girard. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. Make comments and yell at me and do whatever you'd like to do. After all, this show's about you, and I actually really appreciate it, and we take your comments to heart. You can join the Higher Power Radio community at Higher, that's H-I-R-E, Power, P-O-W-E-R, Radio, R-A-D-I-O, .com, or you can drop me an email at rick@stridesearch.com. Tune in next Tuesday. Our guest is going to be David DeFrancis. David is the CEO of IT Proactive. I'm your host, Rick Girard, and you've been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power Radio. Catch our LinkedIn Live show every Tuesday at noon, or download the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you joining us on Higher Power Radio with your guide to recruitment success, Rick Girard.